Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
It's the summer of 1940. Hitler's forces are poised to invade Britain, and all that stands in their way are the men and women of the Royal Air Force.
As wave after wave of enemy bombers make their way towards Britain, commanders desperately try and figure out where they will strike next.
In this series, we're exploring the lost and forgotten tales of the operations room workers, ground crews and pilots who put their lives on the line to defend Britain.
We've all heard of the Battle of Britain, but they've never heard of Archie McKellar.
We're uncovering forgotten documents that reveal the human cost of the battle.
I guess he takes one out before it...
And reliving moments of heroism.
Even when my grandmother was talking about it at the age of 94, it always brought a tear to her eye.
We've already seen how the RAF held out against superior enemy numbers on August the 15th. Now we're jumping ahead 2 weeks to August the 30th. In tonight's episode, we discover what happens when Britain stands on the brink of defeat, as the country faces its most intense day of fighting in the whole battle.
We'll be telling the story in minute-by-minute detail.
As we retrace the 30th of August in the air.
If that was real, we'd have been hit full on.
And on the ground.
Airfield at 15.
It was the greatest battle the RAF ever fought.
But at its heart were the people. This is the story of their Battle of Britain.
(10:30 a.m.) In Nazi-occupied northern France, 160 Luftwaffe aircraft are about to take off. Their targets? RAF airfields in the southeast of England. The Luftwaffe needs to destroy the Royal Air Force if the German invasion of Britain is to go ahead. In just 30 minutes, these planes will be over the Kent coast.
After weeks of fighting, Luftwaffe commanders are under pressure from Hitler to deliver results. So they're planning a final knockout blow, a huge attack designed to eliminate Britain's Air Force once and for all.
It's a day that will push fighter command to the absolute limit and have profound consequences for people on the ground.
There are 21 RAF airfields in the southeast of England. That morning, around 20 squadrons are ready and waiting to protect them. When the Scramble bell rings, these pilots will have 5 minutes to get airborne. Over the past 2 weeks, this part of the country has seen the worst of the fighting. But squadrons all over the country are also ready. One is 64 Squadron at RAF Leconfield in East Yorkshire. Amongst the ground crew is Ronald Pounton. Of the thousands who served in the battle, 99-year-old Ronald is one of only a handful who survives. He had the critical ground crew job of armourer.
An armourer looks after guns, bombs, and everything that goes bang.
That day, Ronald prepared his Spitfire for action, then waited for the Scramble bell.
As soon as you hear the sound, of course, you're up and running. The pilot comes running like an Olympic sprinter up the wing, The rigger helps him strap in. And the pilot taxis out at terrifying speeds. All the pilots are doing the same. And why there was never a crash, I've no idea. And they then form up in pairs and they come roaring up and they're airborne, gone.
At 11 a.m, the first attack approaches the Kent coast, over 200 miles south of Ronald's base in Yorkshire.
Intercept at Angel 20.
9 squadrons are scrambled to intercept the enemy. At RAF Tangmere, Tony Wood Scawen takes off in his Hurricane. Tony is already an incredibly experienced pilot. Although he's only 22 years old, he's shot down 6 enemy aircraft. In the skies above Dungeness, his older brother Patrick, also a Hurricane pilot, is already airborne. At 24, he has 9 enemy kills to his name. In just a few minutes, the brothers will be engulfed in a huge air battle. I'm meeting their relative, Tristan Wood Scawen, in their childhood home of Farnborough.
Hey Tristan, how are you?
The brothers grew up just a stone's throw from the Air Force base which once occupied this very spot.
They did everything together. They were riding around their motorbikes around Farnborough, and everywhere they went, it was all about aviation. I think it was almost inevitable that they joined the RAF. In 1937, they could see that there was another war on the way, so Patrick signed up for a short service commission with the RAF. Patrick was the older one. I think he was about 22 when he joined and progressed really well. He was a really great pilot.
Younger brother Tony was keen to follow in Patrick's footsteps.
But Tony had a bit of a struggle getting in at the start.
Why?
He was pretty much blind in one eye.
So how did he get his pilot's licence?
Well, he queued up for the eye test and someone came out and told him all the letters. So he memorised them, went in and did passed the eye test. And then he got some prescription goggles made, which was totally not regulation for the RAF. But Tony managed to get them done on the sly, and up in the air he went.
They sound like extraordinary characters.
Yeah, I think they were larger-than-life characters. They lived fast and enjoyed life to the full.
at 11:27 a.m. Over 160 enemy aircraft have crossed the Kent coastline. Patrick's Hurricane Squadron dives out of the sun to attack the bombers. Minutes later, Tony's squadron joins the fray. A series of sprawling dogfights quickly develops in the skies over southern England. For eyewitnesses below, the noise is deafening, as swarms of British fighters swoop on the tails of the enemy. And the Wood Scawen brothers are in the middle of it all.
The fighting covers such a huge area that one report says that no matter where you were across Kent, Surrey and South London, all you could see were fighters and bombers fighting it out in the skies.
Hurricane pilot Patrick Wood Scawen shoots down an enemy aircraft near Dover. A few minutes later, Tony destroys another. The brothers now have 17 enemy kills between them. But this is just the beginning of a long day. 11:35 a.m. Inside the plotting room at RAF Biggin Hill, members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force monitor the action. One of those on duty here is Corporal Eleth Henderson. The 27-year-old from Edinburgh volunteered early in the war. Now she's in the thick of it.
In December of 1939, she went to her cousin's wedding. Her cousin was a young lawyer who was in the process of enlisting, and she felt it was morally wrong that he, just married, should be joining up, while she, a single woman, continued to enjoy civilian life.
That's really interesting. So for her, it felt completely wrong that she should be able to sort of really carry on as normal.
Yeah, and she volunteered the following day.
Elspeth is posted to Biggin Hill in January 1940 after just 2 weeks of training.
When she arrived at Biggin Hill, it was quiet. The runways were being extended, so had time to introduce her to radar and to what the job entailed.
As the Battle of Britain begins, Biggin Hill becomes a prime target. Elspeth is the senior WAF on duty in the plotting room. From here, she follows the flight paths of approaching enemy bombers, including those heading for the airfield itself.
She was in charge of the telephone line to headquarters in Uxbridge. My mother used to say that the worst thing about it was seeing the planes approaching, but not knowing until the last minute what their target was.
That must have been terrifying.
Yes, it was.
Today, Biggin Hill is top of the Luftwaffe's hit list.
It's now 11:45 a.m. Patrick Wood Scawen has been in the air for over an hour. He's running low on fuel and returns to RAF Croydon. Somewhere over Kent, Patrick's younger brother Tony is still surrounded by the enemy. A total of 10 RAF squadrons are now battling it out with the Luftwaffe. Meanwhile, in their hometown of Farnborough, one young woman anxiously awaits news of the brothers.
This is a photo with my granny and Patrick. And this would be Tony there.
Bunny Lawrence is in love with both brothers. Her grandson Ben is showing me some of the letters they wrote to her.
Granny always said how much fun they all had, and they'd all go out on the back of the motorbikes and play the guitar on the beach.
And they both came to sort of fall in love with your granny?
They grew up all very good friends, and I presume, obviously, once they got into their late teens, they fell in love with Granny, both of them.
Patrick wrote this letter to Bunny from flying school.
There's a great letter here, darlingest. I have flown a hurricane, so I've reached the 8th heaven. The 7th, 6th, and 5th heavens are you, but my God, what an aeroplane.
When you write to me, don't forget to enclose a wee lock, a wee braidy of your hair to bring me all the luck in the world. Please write soon.
I think there was a lot of badgering, possibly, from the boys for a photo. And then one of the letters does say, thank you so much for the photo.
So it must have been a pretty intense summer, because they're fighting for their lives, they're fighting for king and country, they're also both falling in love with one of their great childhood friends. It's all happening.
Yes, well, it must have been August at the peak of the Battle of Britain, and my granny and Tony got engaged.
So she chose the younger brother?
She chose the younger brother, yes.
It's almost midday. The RAF is defending airfields from waves of enemy attacks. But one squadron is being held back. The pilots of 303 Squadron, based at RAF Northolt, are preparing for a training flight. The squadron is made up almost entirely of highly experienced Polish pilots. They've survived the Nazi invasion of their homeland and fought the Germans again in France before escaping to Britain. The Sikorsky Museum in London keeps a collection of rare artifacts from this squadron.
This is a chronicle of the 303 Squadron. You have so many different stories, priceless stories.
This record documents the lives of the squadron's pilots, including Flying Officer Ludwik Paszkiewicz.
Is this him here?
Yes,
Are we able to
absolutely.
look at that? It's amazing that we've got a photograph of him.
This is actually Ludwik wearing Polish Air Force uniform, so this picture was taken before the war.
So how old would he have been here, do we think?
I would say his early 30s. He got married in 1937, and 1 year later, his baby daughter was born.
The Battle of Britain gave Ludwik a chance to continue the fight against the Nazis.
For them, it was the island of the last hope. They knew if Britain is going to be invaded, they have no place to go. But because of the experience from Poland, they understood German tactics, and they flew similar to Germans.
So does that mean that actually the Poles were more experienced than their British counterparts?
In most cases, yes. Because many of young British pilots, they never experienced combat before.
But before they could fight for the RAF, the Poles need to train on British aircraft.
British equipment was completely different than any other equipment on the continent. Different than Polish aircraft, different than French aircraft. Plus, you know, Poles, they didn't know miles, they didn't know feet, they didn't know yards. They had to convert into British measuring system.
On the 30th of August, Ludwik and the rest of 303 Squadron have been training for almost a month. Yet British commanders are still reluctant to send the Poles into battle.
And they were worried about the Slavic temperament. They thought that Poles, regardless of the British command, they will go for the Germans, which was actually true. They were there to kill the pilot. Because what they experienced in Poland, they saw German bombers dropping bombs on civilian targets. They saw civilians being killed. They left their loved ones in Poland, like Ludwik, for example. He left his wife and his children.
God, he must have been desperate.
Oh, yeah. When he was in France and then in Britain, he knew what he was fighting for.
Right.
He was desperate to go back to his country and to see his family.
Yeah.
At midday, a group of Luftwaffe bombers slipped through the net. They evade the RAF's defences and they head straight for one of Fighter Command's most important airfields, Biggin Hill.
In the Biggin Hill operations room, Corporal Eleth Henderson plots the raid as it approaches her own airfield. Just a few hundred yards away, on Westerham Road, is the home of the Greensmith family. It's been a long, hot summer, and 7-year-old Jeff Greensmith has spent his days hunting for souvenirs around the airfield.
Growing up, I think, in Biggin Hill was a bit of an adventure. It was seriously in the thick of it. This actually fell in our garden down the road here. It's dated 1940, and that came from a Hawker Hurricane. They were trying to shoot down our door near 17 and actually shot the lock off our front door.
Jeff and his family have special permission to enter RAF Biggin Hill. His parents run the cafe at the base.
It gave the airmen a taste of regular civilian life. It was a friendly place, laugh and joke. My dad was a bundle of fun. And there was a rule, I think probably my dad did it, that you did not talk about the war.
Another unwritten rule of the cafe was not to ask about regular customers who didn't return.
Canadian airman came into the cafe on his own, and he sat down and put his head in his hands, and he said to my father, "Bill, customers are dying like flies." And my dad said, "How many?" They did get shot down in handfuls. And of course, you're in a squadron, it's your mates, your friends.
"12:30, August the 30th, 1940. Today, it's not just RAF pilots who are in the line of fire.
At 12:30, 30 of these 250-kilogram bombs are dropped over Biggin Hill. But the Luftwaffe bombers are flying too high. Nearly all of these bombs miss their target and land in surrounding villages. Thankfully, the airfield is still operational.
Luckily, Jeff and his family have a bomb shelter and are unharmed. But this isn't the first time bombers have missed Biggin Hill and hit the village.
The fourth bomb landed 20 yards behind our air raid shelter. A huge bang, and the back of the shelter comes out of the ground. It picked me up and moved me through the shelter. I hit the front wall of this thing. Couldn't breathe. And my mother's mouth is going up and down. I was convinced we were dead.
At 1:30 p.m. on August the 30th, the smoke clears and the civilians around Biggin Hill emerge to survey the damage. But the brief respite in the bombing will not last long. Another huge enemy raid is just about to begin.
Fighter Command has spent all day fending off wave after wave of enemy attacks. But unlike previous days, there's been almost no respite, no pause in enemy raids. That means that many aircraft have been lost, and the RAF's fighter pilots are exhausted.
It's 1:35 in the afternoon. More waves of Luftwaffe bombers are crossing the channel. Their targets are more RAF airfields. But destroying the RAF is proving more difficult than Hitler anticipated. Over 450 Luftwaffe aircrew have died this month. Another 800 are missing. Many of those have been shot down and taken prisoner in Britain. One German pilot crashed near Jeff Greensmith's house in Biggin Hill village. Jeff came face to face with the wounded man.
There's a German in a flying suit, and my dad is crouched over him, and my dad is actually giving this badly wounded German a sip of our brandy. And then I'm standing on the doorstep, and the German goes to me. What the German had was a photograph of his two kids. One is a bit older than me, and the other one is the German version of me. And he cried. I'd never actually seen a man cry. Men don't cry. Cried. Anyway, as the two stretcher bearers lifted this guy, he reached out his hand to my dad, shake hands, which he did, and away he went. We heard afterwards that he died in the ambulance, poor soul. So, yeah, not good.
The high casualty rate is affecting Luftwaffe morale. German aircrews are demoralized and exhausted. Luftwaffe commanders are forced to use rookie pilots to fill the gaps left by those who've been shot down.
Most of the new pilots that were coming in were complete novices because the Germans have been preparing for essentially a blitzkrieg war. Short, sharp, quick, job done.
So the Luftwaffe, they're running out of experienced pilots. How about aircraft?
They didn't have the spare aircraft, and those aircraft were not being produced in the factories at the pace they needed to replace those that were lost. This is a war of attrition.
Propaganda films shown back in Germany paint a very different picture of the battle.
Der Gruppenkommandeur gibt die Anweisungen für den Feindflug. Das Ziel ist die untere Themse-Mündung.
Bomber crews are depicted as heroes, just days away from victory. And on the afternoon of the 30th of August, they're just getting started. At 3:30 p.m., a third wave of Luftwaffe aircraft prepares to take off from airfields in France. It's a huge force of over 600 planes, and it's intended to overwhelm the RAF.
Incredible, John. God, it's the most amazing view.
I'm going to get a sense of what it must have felt like for the men piloting one of the German aircraft on the afternoon of the 30th of August.
Harvard, Blenheim, ready for departure.
I'm in the cockpit of a World War II twin-engine bomber. This is a British one, it's a Bristol Blenheim, but it's very similar to the enemy aircraft that were flying over the southeast of Britain on the afternoon of August the 30th.
This incredible aircraft is piloted by John Romain. From here, I have an almost identical view to that of Luftwaffe aircrews.
In großer Höhe geht es der englischen Küste entgegen.
What is amazing about being in the cockpit of one of these planes is the visibility. All around me there is glass. I feel like I can see at least 180 degrees.
Yeah, that's what you needed, because you needed to be able to see anything that was coming to attack you.
The German formations are flying over southern Britain to their designated targets. Only then can they drop their bombs and return home. They have safety in numbers, but any aircraft that gets separated can be easy prey for the RAF.
Bombers needed to stay together so that their combined machine gun armaments could have an effect against fighters.
Right.
But when they were on their own, everything was on the hunter's side then, because a lone bomber is so vulnerable to a fighter.
Just after 4 p.m., 120 Nazi planes turn north and head for Luton. Their target is the Vauxhall Motorworks, a factory making tanks for the British Army. One aircraft falls behind. The crew doesn't know it yet, but they are about to be spotted by one of the RAF's hunters.
It's 4:15 p.m. At RAF Northolt, Polish pilot Ludwik Paszkiewicz of 303 Squadron is taking off in his Hurricane. He turns north for what should be another routine training flight.
At the same time, the force of 120 German planes is getting closer to the target at Luton. One of them is still flying behind the main formation. I'm in a plane similar to that lone twin-engined Nazi aircraft.
They don't know it yet, but they're about to run into the Hurricanes of 303 Squadron.
20 minutes into his training flight, Ludwik Paszkiewicz spots the lone German aircraft up ahead. He reports it to his squadron leader but gets no reply. So Ludwik takes matters into his own hands. He peels away from the squadron and attacks the German aircraft head-on.
Oh my goodness. I am seeing this Hurricane heading literally straight for our windscreen. It is a sensation I can barely describe. The terror he must have felt.
We can see the Hurricane now coming towards us, and he would have been seeing exactly the same thing. Not being able to maneuver and outpace the Hurricane, knowing he was just going to get shot down. The Hurricane could just literally run rings around a bomber.
Oh my goodness.
The German pilot takes evasive action, but there's very little he can do to escape Ludwig's fighter.
We're diving now, trying to evade the aircraft. It's banking around me now.
But once the hurricane is behind us, I have no idea where he is.
My heart is absolutely thumping. Fear of those pilots must have been just unimaginable.
Ludwik closes in on his prey. Unknown to the German crew, he creeps up beneath them. When he's just a few feet away, he opens fire. The aircraft's right-hand engine bursts into flames.
If that was real, we'd be gone by now, because we'd have been hit full on with all the machine gun fire, and that would have been the end of it.
Remarkably, we know what happened to the German crew thanks to an extraordinary account from one who survived, radio operator Heinrich Nordmeyer.
My pilot was badly wounded. He had been shot in the stomach. He ordered me to bail out. I didn't want to. I was too frightened. He must have felt that he only had a few more seconds to live, so he threw the cabin roof off, turned the aircraft on its back, and I fell out.
That split-second decision by the pilot saves Heinrich's life. He parachutes to safety and is taken prisoner. The pilot, Georg Antony, goes down with his plane.
When Ludwik returns to RAF Northolt, he receives a rapturous reception from his countrymen. Finally, 303 Squadron is made operational. The Polish pilots can officially take part in the Battle of Britain. It's 4:50 p.m. on the 30th of August. The enemy bombers reach Luton and strike the Vauxhall tank factory, killing 53 people. RAF Detling near Maidstone is hit. The airfield's oil tanks explode and the base is put out of action. Five minutes later, Tony Wood Scawen prepares to take off from RAF Tangmere. He's been on the ground just 12 minutes, barely enough time to rearm his Hurricane. Meanwhile, his brother Patrick is back in the air for the 4th time today. The fighting is relentless. Some squadrons will see action 6 or 7 times before the day is out.
It's 5:45 on the 30th of August 1940. The RAF is reeling from a day of almost constant attacks, but there's more to come. Unknown to Air Force commanders, a small formation of enemy aircraft, less than 10 bombers, has come up the Thames estuary and has now turned south. They're heading for RAF Biggin Hill.
It's the second raid on Biggin Hill today. The bombers are flying low and fast. Corporal Eleth Henderson is still in the ops room. This time, the bombers hit the base.
This is an aerial photograph taken from on board one of the Luftwaffe bombers during the raid. You can actually see the bombs exploding on the ground. The barracks, the hangars, and the power station have all been hit. 3 Spitfires have been destroyed on the ground.
A trench packed full of ground crew, men just like Ronald Pounton, who we met earlier, takes a direct hit, killing everyone inside.
"39 people are dead. RAF Biggin Hill, one of the most important airfields in the southeast, is out of action."
Elspeth survives the raid that day. She is one of the first on the scene to help dig survivors out of the rubble. But the next day, the bombers hit again.
She was the senior WAF on duty in the operations room when Biggin Hill came under attack yet again.
This time, the operations room takes a direct hit.
The bomb came straight through the roof, bounced off the teleprinter and exploded.
Elspeth's telephone is the only line of communication between Biggin Hill and Fighter Command HQ. she stays at her post until the operations room is engulfed in flames. I can't imagine sitting here with all that noise and catastrophe and being able to carry on.
She said she felt very detached. She was just doing her job.
But she survived.
She did, yes. They all survived.
August the 30th, just after 6 p.m. Luftwaffe bombers are returning to their bases in northern France. They leave a trail of destruction behind them. Much of RAF Biggin Hill, critical for the defence of London, has been reduced to rubble. The RAF is reeling from a day of non-stop attacks. The Luftwaffe have flown over 1,300 missions. At RAF airfields across the southeast, ground crew are watching for returning aircraft. It's an agonizing wait.
This is the difficult period. We sit waiting, and we sit waiting, and somebody will always say, "Stone me, they're cutting it ruddy fine." Whoop, big roll, they're back. Magic, they're back. Oh, suddenly you're alive again. We jump to our feet and you count them. 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, 9. Holy smoke, 3 missing. And you stand there in the pen with the 3 mates. Is it ours? Is it theirs? Then they taxi into the bay, and eventually you know it's yours.
Like so many ground crew, Ronald had to cope with the loss of pilots he served with during the 3 months of the battle.
This is the awful, awful time. There are 2 aircraft in a bay. The aircraft next to you is in the bay, and they're working like smoke, rearming, refuelling, and so. And you stand there looking at nothing. And nobody comes to say hard luck or anything. And the 3 of you stand there and you realise the others are crying as well. It's an awful, awful feeling.
How many times did your plane not come back?
We lost 5. And it takes a lot of getting over. You got to know those pilots perfectly, and they became part of the crew. And suddenly, they're not there anymore. And that's ever so difficult to live with.
6:45 p.m. Brothers Tony and Patrick Wood Scawen are both safely back at their bases. Between them, they've flown 8 missions today and shot down 2 enemy aircraft. But their story doesn't end there. I've come to the village of Ivy Church in Kent to find out what happened to the brothers next.
It must be amazing, Tristan, meeting Ben and realising you've got so much in common.
Yeah, I mean, it's the 2 families have always been connected throughout the years.
With me is Ben Mather, grandson of the brothers' sweetheart, Bunny Lawrence, and Tony and Patrick's relative, Tristan Wood Scawen.
Unfortunately, tragedy struck. First, Patrick, on the 1st of September, bailed out too low, and then 24 hours later, Tony came down, again, bailed out too low, flying a Hurricane just like his brother. Neither knew about the other's fate. Tony went down just a few hundred metres from here. The tragedy of it is that they both died within 24 hours of each other, and the whole family was devastated.
Tony was found close to his plane and carried here to St George's Church, where he died of his injuries. Bunny Lawrence mourned the deaths of both Patrick and Tony.
Even when my grandmother was talking about it at the age of 94, it always brought a tear to her eye. So it's, yeah, very sad time for the family and my granny.
In June 1941, Bunny accompanied Tony and Patrick's father to Buckingham Palace to collect their Distinguished Flying Cross medals from King George VI. It's now early evening on August the 30th. Flying officer Ludwik Paszkiewicz is safely back at RAF Northolt. We suspect he is celebrating his first victory of the battle. Meanwhile, 7-year-old Jeff Greensmith is at home in Biggin Hill village. The raid on the airfield has cut off gas and electricity to his family's house in Westerham Road.
For their bravery during the Biggin Hill raids, Eleth Henderson and 2 colleagues are awarded the Military Medal. They're the first women ever to receive the honour. In later life, Elspeth wrote about the war.
War is a dirty, dangerous and sad way of solving problems and should be avoided. But it was the only language that Hitler understood.
She was very aware of the lives that were lost in general during that time, and it was very important to her that it all should be remembered.
But the same raid that Elspeth survived killed dozens of RAF ground crew. By the end of the battle, more than 300 will be dead.
I'm afraid a lot of Battle of Britain talk is almost saying it was great fun for the... It wasn't great fun for the pilots, and it certainly wasn't great fun for the ground crews. I mean, it was a war. Heavens above, it was a war.
Do you consider yourself a hero?
No. No. I wouldn't use the word hero.
What would you
All
mean?
I did was run around like a mad young man on the ground. Heroes? They were the lads up there. They're the heroes.
1900 hours. Hitler's Air Force has failed to deal the knockout blow its commanders hoped for. The RAF has stood its ground. Just.
British fighter pilots have flown more missions on this day than any other of the battle so far, just over 1,000. Ground crews have barely had time to rearm and refuel aircraft before they're scrambled into action again.
8 fighter pilots have been killed and 39 aircraft destroyed, including 8 from just one squadron.
10 airfields have been hit, some on multiple occasions. RAF Biggin Hill, central to the defence of London, has suffered badly. 39 of its personnel have been killed. And civilians have borne the brunt as well. 200 are dead.
The RAF can't take many more days like this. The outcome of the Battle of Britain is on a knife edge.
In the next episode, we reveal what happens as Britain faces the threat of a Nazi invasion in just a few days' time.
The losses were huge. They would send the squadrons out, not one of them would come back.
As the Battle of Britain reaches its climax on the 15th of September 1940, the RAF risk everything in the face of a final Luftwaffe onslaught.
This is their finest hour.